Okay, so today we're going to be making our table runner out of these quilt blocks that we've made. So if you haven't, go back and watch the videos on how to make these quilt blocks. I'll just show them here. We need 4 quilt blocks. These are all 9.5 inches. We have this variation of the sawtooth star. We have the double monkey wrench or churn dash quilt block. We have the Greek cross quilt block. And then we have an uneven 9 patch quilt block. So these are all 9.5, like I said. You will also need, this is for the sashing, these strips right here. They are 2.5 by 9.5. You'll need 13 of those. And then you'll also need 2.5 inch squares, and there's 10 of these. Okay, so to get started, we're just gonna lay out our table runner. It's going to be a little hard to see all in frame of the camera, so we'll probably just show you one portion of it, but it's the same for the whole thing. So we'll just lay them out in order. I'm just going to do maybe like this. So we'll have the nine patch on the end, and then these 3. Okay, so I'm just going to move those 2 off to the side, and we'll just work on this half. The process will be the same for the whole thing, but what I just like to do is I just lay out my pieces. So I just have these 2.5 by 9.5 inch strips, and they're going to go on all sides of the squares. So just like this. And then this one will just be between the 2 blocks. And then we'll go ahead and add our strips on this one as well. And then we would continue on for the rest of the quilt. Lay it out like that, or the rest of the table runner. We'll lay it out like that. Then we'll add our little 2.5 inch squares to all the little corners of the block. So that will just frame out the quilt. Okay, so there we have those. And for this next part, what I like to do is I just like to create strips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this first little 3 pieces, these 2 cornerstones and this sashing piece, and I'm going to sew those together. Then I will take this block with the 2 sashing strips and sew those together, and then repeat with this strip, this block, and then the strip. So if that makes sense, we'll go over to the sewing machine and we'll sew these 3 pieces together. Okay, so there we have our first little strip all sewn together. I did go ahead and press the seams towards the black, and if we do that with every strip, then they will nest nicely. So next we'll grab these 3 pieces and we'll sew them together. And we'll just continue on with the remainder of the strips. All right, so we have all of our pieces sewn together. Now it's time to sew them to each other. So we will just take each strip, flip it right sides together, and we'll sew along here. Then we'll do the same thing with this side, sew along the long edge. Let me just show you. As we go, we're going to want to nest the seams. So what that means is, remember how we pressed the seams towards the black? So on this one, the seam is pressed towards the black. This one, the seam is pressed towards the black. So when we place them right sides together, the seams are going in opposite directions. So we'll just want to butt those seams up against each other as we go, and that's called nesting the seams. and that will help us, our corners to match up nicely and for the block to lay nice and flat. So we'll just go ahead, we'll sew them together. Just make sure your right side's together, and then we'll just keep adding to it. We'll sew this one, then we'll take this one, we'll sew that one to it, and just go on down the line. Our table runner top is done. You can see I've completed all of the piecing. And so next we need to cut out our back and our batting. So to do this, I measure the top. So from the top to the bottom, short ways is 13.5 inches. Long ways, it's 46.5. So I'm going to add 2 inches to both of those measurements, and that is the measurements that I'm going to use to cut the back and the batting. So that would be 15.5 by 48.5. So let me just move these. I've got our batting, or back here, and you're going to place it right side down. We're going to make a quilt sandwich, and I'll just show you on this end kind of how I do it. So you'll just lay that nice and flat, then you'll add your batting piece and just lay that directly on top, and just make sure it's all smooth. And of course you do this down the whole length of the table runner. That's just hard to show on the video, so we'll just do this top corner. Then you'll grab your top and you're going to place it on. Now the back and the batting are going to be just a little bit bigger, which is what we want. So you're going to leave about 1 inch on all sides of it and then smooth it flat. And then I like to take these little pins. These are special pins for quilting. I don't know if you can tell, they have this little bit of a curve on them. And what it's designed for is that you can just put them in and then it comes right back up so that you can pin your piece in place. So I'm just going to pin the quilt sandwich together. Okay, so I've got this first block all pinned, and I'll just point out the pins for you. Some of them are hard to see with the different patterns, but you can see they're just evenly spaced throughout the block, and it just keeps our quilt together, the top, the back, the batting, and the top all together. So we'll just move along down the quilt and we'll pin it all together, and once we're done with that, we will quilt it. Now you can quilt any way you'd like. I'm just going to show you one way that I've been doing a lot of quilts lately. That's pretty easy. So now we're ready to quilt, and I'm just taking my piece and I'm kind of starting in the center. It doesn't have to be exactly the center. I'm just kind of taking this section right here, and I've got my ruler here. So on the end there's these markings. So I'm lining up this mark along the top edge of the quilt, and then I'm going to be sewing diagonals in this direction. So what I do, I'm just going to remove a couple of these pins here that are going to be in the way for this. Okay, and then I'll just take some painter's tape, and I like this thick kind. You can do a variety of sizes depending on what you like, but this will give me a nice thick spacing between my stitching. So I'm just going to line up the ruler, and I'll just take my tape and I'm just going to line it up against the ruler. You could just pick a random angle. You don't have to have a ruler, but what we're going to do is we're going to go to the sewing machine and we will stitch along both sides of the tape. Then we'll just move the tape. This edge will just move to the stitch here, and then we'll stitch on the other side. And then we can have evenly spaced lines. This is a great way to do some quilting if you just have a regular sewing machine. And for a project like a table runner, that's totally doable on a regular sewing machine. So we'll head over to the sewing machine and get started. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine, and one thing I forgot to mention, you'll want to use your probably largest stitch length that you can for the quilting portion. So I just crank that all the way up to the highest setting, and then we're just going to stitch along this side of the tape. Okay, so we'll just remove our tape, and you can see that we've got our stitching on both sides. Now we'll just use this line of stitching to line up one edge of the tape, and we will just stitch along, and we'll just continue working our way down the table runner. But that's just kind of how I go about quilting without a long arm and just using my regular sewing machine. The diagonal is really forgiving. I've tried straight lines before, and sometimes it just doesn't look that great, because if the line isn't perfectly straight or if the sewing isn't perfectly straight, it can sometimes look not so great. But the diagonal is really forgiving because it's not necessarily lined up with part of the quilt. So that's why I like to do the diagonal. It's been my go-to as of late, especially for small projects like this. Okay, so you may notice that the tape is not super sticky, and after a few times it loses its stickiness. I try to use it as long as possible. I feel like even if it's not super sticky, you can just hold it in place along the line, but you can replace it every couple times if you'd like, if you feel more comfortable with that. Okay, so we have our quilting done on this half of the table runner. So we just need to do the other side. So what I'll just do is I'll just flip my table runner upside down. Then I'll just grab my tape and line it up on this first line that we did. And then we'll just continue on finishing the quilt on this side. Okay, so we've got our table runner all quilted, going the one direction. And this is cute. You could totally leave it like it is. I decided maybe I'll try and doing some crosshatch stitching. I don't know if that's what it's called, but stitching in the opposite direction just to see what it's like. So I'm going to take the 60-degree line again, place it on the edge but facing the opposite direction, and then I'll just take my tape and I'll place that, and then I will just do the same thing we did before, stitching on both sides and moving the tape, stitching again just as we did the first time around. And we'll see how that turns out. Alright, so the table runner is now all quilted. You can see the fun diagonal quilting on it. On the back it shows up nicely as well. And so next what we're going to do is we're going to trim off our extra batting and backing. So I'm just going to flip this around. Since I'm right-handed, it will be easier this way. And I'll just take a straight edge ruler, and I've left all my little strings. I didn't trim them up because I knew I would just cut them off. So just kind of slide them so they will be cut off here. And we'll just take our ruler and we'll just place it on the edge and take our rotary cutter and slice it right off. And then we'll just flip and we'll do this, the long sides. So just the same way, we'll just line it up. And if you can see right here, I don't know if you can tell, the ruler, the straight edge is a little bit, or I guess in other words, my fabric is not straight right now. And that's okay. So some of this, you can see a little bit of batting, but just take like eyeball like the straightest part and trim it so you'll be able to see here. So some of this batting is showing through, but that's okay because when we add the binding, that will all be covered up. So it's okay if it's not perfectly even, but this new line that we're cutting, we will want to be even. So we'll just continue on and trim all the sides. So now we have our table runner all ready for the binding. Now for the binding, I've already cut some strips of fabric here. So these are 2.5 inches by the whole width of the fabric. So I've cut 3 different strips and that should be enough. So how you calculate how much binding you need is you take the perimeter of your piece. So remember this was 13.5 this way, and then it was 46.5 that way. So you'll take 13.5 plus 13.5 for both ends, plus 46.5 plus 46.5. And then you add 10 inches to that. And that is how many inches long you'll need your binding to be. So we're going to sew these pieces together to make one big long strip. So we'll go over to the sewing machine and I will show you how to do that. You're going to take one long strip and you'll place it this direction. Then you'll take your next strip. You're going to make like a T. You'll want to make sure that this frayed edge is a little bit above the line of this other fabric. So kind of like this. So you'll line it up, and then you're going to go from this top corner right here down to this corner right here. And I just eyeball it. I'm sure you could be fancier, mark it or something, but I'm just going to place my needle down right there. And I have these lines on my sewing machine that kind of keep this point lined up, and then I'll just stitch. And one thing to remember is to turn your stitching spacing back down to, I just do 2.5, or that's halfway on my machine. So what you'll see is after you open it up, it just creates this big long strip. So now that we know that we've sewn it right, if you happen to sew this way, it probably isn't going to line up the right way. But since we sewed it right and it looks like it's going to be a big long strip, I'll go ahead and trim this part off right here. I just do roughly 1/4 inch away from the stitching. And then in a minute we'll go and press that flat. But then we'll just take, as we go, make sure that the fabric is right side up. Then we'll just run it along till we get to the other end here. And then we'll just do the same thing with the next piece. You would continue this process for how many pieces you need, depending on the size of your project, how much batting or binding you'll need. But we'll just do that same thing where we overlap the other fabric vertically. And then again, we will stitch from this corner to this corner. Where the fabrics meet is where you're stitching from. So we'll go ahead and turn the fabric, and we'll just line up this bottom corner with this stitching line that you probably can't see, and then we'll just stitch along here. Okay, and then so we open it back up and it's one piece big long strip. So we'll go ahead and trim this again, and that is how you make your binding strips. Okay, so here we have our big long strips of binding. So now we need to press them so that they look like binding. So first off, we're going to go at the seams, and we will just press those flat. And then let's do the other one. We'll just get those nice and flat. And then we'll just start with one end. Get rid of this excess here. And we're just going to fold it in half and press it. So I know there's little fancy tools that you can use to kind of hold it in place. I just take it, fold it in half, stitch along as I go, move it down a little bit, and press again. did I just say stitch along? I meant press along. And we'll just continue on down the whole length of the binding. Oh, and I just made a mistake. So you can see that the binding, there's a right side and a wrong side. So I just pressed all of this so that this seam will be on the outside. I don't know if you can tell in the camera, but we want the seam to be on the inside. So I'm going to have to go back. I'm just going to press it all flat and I'll go the opposite direction. So that's something to keep in mind. So you don't have to do it twice like me. So this will be a little, we just want to make sure that we get it pressed in that same crease that we just used. And this time we'll press it the correct direction. It doesn't quite want to stay as much, so you might want to add a little water if this happens to you, just to kind of get that to lay a little flatter, but it will be fine. Okay, so we have our binding all pressed and ready to add. So next we'll grab our table runner. Now you'll want to add the binding to the top side of your project. And you don't want to start at the end. You want to start a ways down so you have some room to join the pieces. So I'm going to just start right here on this orange block right here. You also don't want to start, you don't want to start right here and start sewing, but you want to start, leave a tail. So you want to leave, I don't know, 6 or 7 inches of your tail. And one thing that you want to do is you see the part that opens. All this black is really kind of hard to feel. The part that opens goes on the outside. So all the raw edges will be together. The raw edges of the quilt, the raw edges of the binding all line up on the same side. And I normally don't pin. You can pin if that makes it easier for you, but I'm just going to kind of pin it right here to kind of show where I'm going to start. Maybe if you can even see it. This is where I'm going to start. I have this tail and I'm not at the edge. I'm down a ways from my project, and I'm just going to take 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and I'll sew along the edge. So as we get nearing the edge, we don't want to sew all the way to the edge. We want to stop 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Go ahead and clip off those strings here. Now to get the corner, here's how my mom taught me to do this. So you're going to take your piece, you're going to place it so that it creates this diagonal. Okay, so you've got it straight. You're going to place it so that the binding is perpendicular and it creates this little diagonal right here. And then you're going to take your piece and I've just used my fingers to kind of hold it. Then you'll place it like this. So you've got it straight along both sides, and you've got that angle piece underneath to kind of create the corner. Then you'll just take it and you'll just stitch starting from the edge and stitch along the side as you were. Okay, so I don't know if this will be easier to see with this camera or not, but I just thought I'd show you one more time how to do the corner. So remember, we stitched about 1/4 of an inch away, and we're going to take our fabric and we're going to fold it so it's on the diagonal like this. Then we're going to take it and we're going to press it or fold it this way. So we have a straight edge right here, and underneath there's that diagonal for the miter corner. Now, if you'd like, you can pin it in place so that it stays where you want it, but that is how you do the corners for binding. We've almost gotten back to the beginning. So here's where we started. We have a little bit of a tail, and I'm going to end this right here, maybe another inch or so. And I'll give it a little bit of a back stitch to hold that stitch good as we're doing this. And we'll just trim, and you want to leave a few tails. So I'll go over to the other camera to explain this a little better. All right, so here is how we are going to combine the pieces. So we have this bottom section. This is the section we started with. We're just going to line it up with the edge. Now I have this scrap of fabric from when I was cutting the binding, and this is the width that the binding is. So we're going to use that. We're going to line it up with the edge, the top edge of that binding piece that's sewn on right here. Then we'll take our top layer. We're going to place it on top, and then this bottom part of the fabric is where we're going to cut this piece. So we'll just very carefully just trim that like that. Okay, so now we have our pieces cut to the correct length. The next thing we need to do is we need to sew them together. So to do this, we are going to take our bottom piece. Actually, I think it's better to start with the top piece. So we're going to take our top piece. We're going to lay it out flat. Now this is where you're going to have to scrunch your fabric together because you're going to join these two pieces. We're basically going to create the same thing that we did when we did our binding pieces when we were just making the big long strips. We're just going to line it up just like that, so corner to corner. So I don't know if I explained this very well. So you're going to take your top piece, it's folded like this, you're going to open it up and place it out like this. Okay, then you're going to take your bottom piece, you're going to take it and you're going to open it up this direction, and then you're going to place the corners match up, the top and the side match up, and then you're going to stitch a diagonal line from corner to corner. Okay, so this is a little tricky, but I added some pins to help keep it in place. We're just going to stitch from that corner where this bottom piece meets the top piece, and then we'll go to this corner where the bottom piece meets the top piece right here. So we'll just kind of... Okay, so we have sewn our seam to connect our binding pieces. Now before we trim off this extra, this triangle up here, we can just trim that off. But before we do that, I just like to make sure that it lays flat and that I did the folding and such correctly so that the binding lays flat, and it looks like it is. So we'll just go ahead and we'll trim off this little piece. I just do it roughly 1/4 of an inch away from that stitching line. We'll get rid of that, and then it will just lay flat like that, and we will just stitch this last little bit closed. So now something that often happens to me when I'm just at the end, I'll get this little bit of a bunching, but we're going to be folding this over, and you can see on the other side there's not any of that. So I don't worry about that if there's just a little bit of pinching right there. It's fine. So that's how you add the binding to the project. Okay, so we have the binding all the way around our table runner on the front side. So next what we'll need to do is we're going to stitch it to the back side, and I like to do this by hand. So we'll just flip the piece over, and we're going to take our binding and we're going to wrap it around to the side. So okay, so we have our binding like this, and I have a length of string threaded through a needle, and I've just knotted the end. Okay, so I'm just going to take that, I'm going to insert it in between the fabric and bring it up on the fold of the binding, just like that. Okay, then I'm going to take a little bite of fabric, of this white fabric, and bring it up. Then I'll insert it into the binding just inside of that folded edge, and then just bring it, I don't know, what's that, 1/2 inch forward, and pull it through. Okay, You can do this in one motion, so just grab a little bit of fabric, insert that needle in the tubing, and pull it out. So I don't know how well you can see this, but I just go around grabbing that tiny bit of fabric, sticking the needle inside the fold of the fabric, and pulling it out. Okay, so I'm just going to bring it closer. I don't know how well this is going to come through on video. So we just keep our binding folded over. We're going to grab just a little bite of fabric, like that much or less. Then you're going to take your needle, point it through that tube of the black binding, and pull it up. Okay, when I get about right here, close to the edge, I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to turn it like this. I'm going to start working on this side. So we have kind of a triangle. I just fold up this side, just like this. And then I'm just going to do a few little stitches to kind of keep this corner down. Okay, so this is really hard to see with the black. I'm just going to go down underneath both fabrics and pull my needle up through the corner right here, okay? And then I'll just grab to the side of that corner and I'll just pull it up through again. That'll just kind of tack that part down. And then I'll just go ahead and continue along. This is not the perfect way, that's just how I do it because it's quick and easy. I'm sure there's a way to get perfect miter corners, but I haven't worried about that. So whenever I learn that technique, I'll share it with you, but for now, that's how I do it. And then I'll just continue along, just in the same way. Just grab that little bite of fabric, you can tell, insert that needle through the binding right along the fold and pull your needle through. Okay, so I'm not going to film all of my hand stitching, that would just take forever, but this is kind of what it looks like once you've got the binding stitched down. And then on the front, that's kind of what it looks like. So you can see up here it's not stitched yet, and then right here it starts getting stitched. But thanks for joining me with this project. I hope you learned something. I'd love to see any of your projects that you make. So share those with me, and thanks for joining me.